Esta conferencia comenzará a grabarse.
So, welcome everybody to this session of the European Alliance Against Coronavirus morning videos. Okay, today we will review the cluster landscape in Ireland. I am really happy to have you here with us today, Clodagh, Eoin, Eleanor, and to be discussing about your beautiful country. So thank you for joining us. Before starting, I need to remember everyone that we are going to record this session and it will be published both in the ECCP and the European Cluster Collaboration Platform and in the European Cluster Alliance channel. So if you remain with us, you are accepting this. That's very important to say. And without any more introduction, I think that it's time to welcome Eleanor Doyle from the University College Cork. Eleanor, I cannot see you now.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Thanks to everyone for tuning in this morning. Let me share my screen, if that is possible.
I'm giving you the presentation rights. Just one moment.
Perfect. So hopefully I can navigate.
If you have any problem, I could share from my computer if you prefer it. Okay, Eleanor?
Can you see my presentation?
Not yet.
Yeah, my screen is telling me that it's showing, unfortunately. So technology is
not working.
Let me just check one thing. Technology is great as long as it works, and then it doesn't. And let's see. Close again.
If not, I could share from my computer if you prefer it.
It might be best if it's not working. I'm not sure what my options are, Antonio. So my apologies.
Okay, I will follow your instruction. No problem at all. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So thank you very much for the invitation. I will talk to you this morning for a few minutes about the process of embedding clusters in the Republic of Ireland, joining the dots. And I'm not sure it's the best title to have used, but you can make your judgment of that when I get to the end of the presentation. So I'm coming to you from University College Cork. We're down on the south coast of Ireland. And like everyone, I guess, or many of us still, I'm working from the university from my spare room. So delighted to be with you this morning. I might move on to the next slide if that's okay, Antonio. So as I was preparing for this morning, I kind of started with a European in consideration of the cluster landscape. And when I look out from Ireland and I see these kinds of encouraging pictures across Europe, you know, we can appreciate the extent, the scale, the depth of the cluster organization landscape.
Sorry, my mistake. I am sharing again. Sorry.
No problem. Thanks, Antonio. So we can see that as we look out, and with I guess with a substantial amount of envy really from Ireland, we can see this busy cluster organization landscape. And as a cluster researcher of some 20+ years, there's a lot of encouragement in that when you see the successes and the different examples, and I guess the variety of models according to which cluster organizations function and deliver for their members, and also for, you know, the greater institutions that they're part of. So their success is built on what we know and understand, I guess, as cluster practitioners and cluster researchers, a business focus, that they're driven by the business members largely. And for me, that's the perspective I take when I think about cluster organizations. And that's, I guess, quite traditional now at this stage to recognize that business heart at the center of the cluster organization, that mission, the vision, and I guess the business requirement to deliver on its resources, to use them productively for business purpose, and larger missions that are becoming increasingly part of the whole cluster focus and discussion. And an attractive feature is the ability of the cluster organization to not only interact with its members, to not only interact with all of the different actors that those members can work with, but recognizing that the nature of the interactions shifts and changes over time. It shifts and changes because different actors come on the scene, but also because there are different requirements. So this notion of change and living with, as we've seen in terms of the COVID catastrophe, living with those new environmental challenges such as they demand flexibility and adaptability of cluster organizations. So that for me is the key feature as I look out. And if I can have a look at the next slide. As I think of that picture again and put Ireland in that context, a recent survey of SMEs across Europe revealed a picture that again was quite positive from an Irish perspective. So asking SMEs which of the following statements applies to your enterprise, a number of responses revealed that SMEs could indicate whether they were a member of an industry cluster or another SME business support organization. So this was really interesting. We've got the percentage of SMEs who are organized in this way. And if we could look at the following slide, I've just called out the fit of Ireland within the larger context. And Ireland, SMEs here, about 28% of them in this survey responded that they had membership of an industry cluster or another SME business support organisation. And that percentage of 28 for Irish SMEs is double the same figure across the EU 27, which again, can paint quite a positive picture of where Ireland stands in this cluster organisational landscape. We're not at the levels of Sweden or Belgium or Spain, but fourth place is quite a tidy performance for a small country like Ireland. To the extent that picture, though, for me as a cluster researcher and working with different cluster practitioners over the years, to the extent that it mirrors my experience or the general cluster experience, I would have to question, though. And we might move on to the next slide, if that's okay. And some of the titles and things are missing off of these slides, but don't worry, we can share them at the end of the session. As a cluster researcher looking at clustering in Ireland, I worked with a colleague, Chris Van Egeraat, in the University of Maynooth a couple of years ago, and there was an interesting forum around industrial and business development that we hosted in our university. And back in 2018 with Chris, we conducted some research and we put our ideas together around the cluster process. And we agreed that as a concept, the cluster and our version of it in terms of the active word clustering, they had gained quite limited traction in policy making in Ireland. We know the roots of clusters and clustering all the way back to 1990 and Porter and so on. But by 2018, there still was no agreed or consistent, clear definition of cluster across the Irish policy-making landscape. That lack of coherence came through in our review of various, policy documents, which we reviewed, over quite a substantial period. And yet, from our research, and international research, we know that the activities that business is engaged in, clustering is central to a lot of what we understand are the benefits from businesses cooperating, collaborating, and working together. We did note, though, that there were some signs of change or hope, I guess. And in one interview with Anne-Marie Tierney, who then was head of regions for IDA Ireland, she had told us that there was a more tailored approach to clustering in the development space than she had seen in the previous 10 years. And her perspective was from the multinational sector, supported by IDA Ireland. So we thought that was quite positive. And that around that time, 2 or so years ago, a regional enterprise development fund had been set up by Enterprise Ireland, the local agency working with Indigenous companies. And they had spelled out a number of goals that they wanted to reach around community and regional focus, to drive enterprise development and job creation, and to stimulate enterprise clustering initiatives. So our historical, I guess, worry about the lack of cluster in policy, we were wondering if we were on the cusp of some changes. So if we can move perhaps to the next slide. And again, this slide, I guess, is more of a contextual background or foundational set of ideas that everyone in the clustering space, I guess, well recognizes. That we know, the benefits of cluster organizations, which have, been quite lacking in Ireland. Like their focus is really productive in terms of either building or renewing a number of different bridges that have business at the center, and there are pathways out to other businesses, to research agencies, to providers of education and training, to sources of capital and funding, public organizations. And cluster organizations help the business, which is at the core of this framework here, to actually deliver on its various missions. We know that cluster organizations help set up and renew and adapt those different relationships over time. We know in terms of policy making that quite a focus has been on building those bridges where they're absent, or developing improving their quality over time. And those issues are as alive and required for the Irish context as they are for other contexts as well. And again, we know that there are different types of benefits, external benefits, that can be generated through all of those relationships, again requiring local knowledge of exactly what activities are being undertaken by the businesses within the clusters, and also the extent of the geographical orientation. You can imagine almost a matrix of activities by geographies, and different cells in the matrix will help us understand which activities really are generating what we call, external economies or external benefits. And the extent to which Irish businesses are yet to really maximize on those possibilities is a source of I guess, potential that really needs to be tapped further. So if I can move on to the next slide, perhaps. I had a look through the latest report from the European Expert Group on Clusters, and you will have seen yourselves, that they're focused really on three main areas in the publication around green transition, digital transition, and building resilience. And if I can move on quickly to the next slide, I wanted to check to what extent that sort of thinking might have been evident in a very recent report of an SME task force that was published for the Republic of Ireland. And interestingly, the publication focused on sources and pillars for long-term development of the SME sector in particular. And it was great to see clustering and networks called out with the regional and sectoral focus, building on the thinking that's evident from Enterprise Ireland and to some extent IDA Ireland. But you can see, even at a very high level in terms of how this report is structured, clustering and networks is one of 4 areas addressed explicitly in the document. Climate action is I guess, added in as a cross-cutting or a horizontal issue that will affect entrepreneurship, productivity, digitalization and competitiveness, internationalization, and then clustering is seen to be separate to that. So the thinking, I guess, and the difference in the thinking and the role and the potential for clusters becomes evident, I think, even when you compare the latest ECP publication, which sees, if you like, clusters as a means of delivering on all of these new and great challenges that we're facing. And I think our perspective here still sees clustering with some potential, but not really being able to harness it, I think, in a way that probably could deliver better for us. If we might move on, please, Antonio. A number of immediate and medium term goals have been identified for SMEs. Immediately over the next year, a focus on considering where SMEs are now in terms of their partnerships, their cluster networks, to basically understand the landscape, and then to create a central communications platform to help the actors within this space to actually acknowledge the depth and the extent of activity, which is very, very welcome. And then pushing forward over the next couple of years, it sees the establishment of a government programme to formalise these business networks and cluster management organisations to improve quality standards and funding structures, all of which are very welcome. The professionalisation of cluster management, which we've seen across Europe, is called out here for action for Ireland as well. And then to fund a national climate cluster, again, very positive in terms of the grand challenges that are faced. So the SME focus, I think, sees us aligning ourselves very much with where policy and where practice has gone in Europe, behind the curve for sure, but at this stage, I guess it's in the right direction. So I might just finish up on the final slide. What now for Clusters Ireland? Well, it's an open question, and I think for a long time the whole concept of clustering for Republic of Ireland and policy making, if you like, clusters have been an answer almost in search of a question. We've been unsure how to actually use them. It's been a bit of an orphan policy area, and perhaps still is, because integration that may have occurred has not yet. Some of that may be explained, in terms of the success of other types of approaches to policy. Perhaps our positioning as a small open economy gives us a different perspective and a peripheral economy. But in terms of the sorts of questions that clusters can answer, we know in terms of market failure, there's a role to play. In terms of network failure, clusters have a role to play in collaboration and developing the relations that help in terms of delivering policy. A lot to be learned, I think, for us in Ireland from the European rollout of these different types of horizontal policies that can be delivered through clusters. We don't have the depth or the extent of cluster organisations yet to do that. So I guess we need to make our way carefully, not to perhaps try and do the wrong things too quickly. But there's much to be said in terms of the possibilities of clustering for co-designing and partnership to meet the local needs, and to bring the impetus, I think, and the support and the community that we have seen generated certainly through the COVID crisis, that will allow our grassroots community focus to actually have a greater role to play. And I think that's where I can finish and move on. Just wanted to bring to your attention some different research that we've been involved in here. So thank you for the opportunity to present this morning.
You are very welcome, Eleanor, and in fact, it has been very inspiring presentation, and I think that we have a lot of things to discuss, but later, okay? First, it's time to welcome Eoin. Sorry for the pronunciation. I'm sure it's totally horrible, but I cannot avoid it. Anyway, welcome, Eoin. And I'm giving you the presentation rights if you want. Or should I present myself?
Yes, if you're okay to continue sharing, Antonio,
Okay.
that'd be good.
Okay, let me open the file.
Thanks very much.
Let me check if it is this one.
Just as Antonio was doing that, thanks very much for the invitation this morning. And I think some of what I'd have to say about the other part of the island, Northern Ireland, will echo much of what Eleanor's had to say, perhaps with a few differences, but I think you'll find a similar picture north of the border. So it's quite good. There's quite a good alignment, I think, between the two parts of the island. So thanks, Antonio. So if you want to move on to the next slide. We, in the Economic Policy Centre where I work in Ulster University, we undertook a large research report for the Department for the Economy, the Northern Ireland Department, back in 2019. And in a sense, I think it was the desire of the department at that stage was to develop and design a sort of cluster policy, and indeed a sort of larger cluster programme for Northern Ireland. There was an understanding, I think, within the department that we'd come to this quite late with a very successful business networks programme that had been running for the best part of a decade. Invest Northern Ireland, which would be the local development agency, has been running that for over 10 years. Very project focused, very successful in terms of the companies involved, but moving it up a stage to cluster development hadn't happened, and there was a sense there that needed to be the next stage, and a sense also a recognition of coming to this quite late. Rather like south of the border, there'd have been industrial policy focus on MNCs, and foreign direct investment was the key there, rather than on more bottom-up SME approach. So I think that's probably been a key element of that. So we looked at three particular sectors and carried over 100 local firms, mostly small and medium sized, that we interviewed across those three sectors. And you can see there what we were trying to understand, what was the extent of their ongoing clustering activity or indeed collaboration, what were the barriers, and then what was the differences between the three sectors, one in transport machinery, creative industries and immersive technologies. And I suppose the other side to the business networks programme was that there was a strong set of sectoral concentrations across Northern Ireland economy, some of it to do with sort of industrial legacy and some of it to do with emerging sectors in technology areas such as financial technologies and cybersecurity. So just the next slide, please, Antonio. So just going through what we found from the consultations then across those three sectors, we found that many companies felt that they were engaged in collaboration. The percentages are not dissimilar to the EU average that Eleanor quoted there. Around 14–15% of companies felt they were collaborating with other companies either through business support organisations or indeed through business networks. Collaboration and clustering were used interchangeably by consultees, but you got a sense when you tease that out that there was a spectrum, and I'll come back to that point. Clusters were often confused, including by policymakers in particular, I think, with sectoral concentrations. So an idea that we have a big sectoral concentration in, say, pharmaceuticals or indeed agri-food processing, that was the same as a cluster. So there was, I think, quite a lot of confusion there. That confusion still reigns, I suspect. We found no hard and fast rules between the sectors we looked at, but we did find, I suppose, that, and this is no great surprise, that within mature competitive sectors, particularly in the kind of industrial side, they were less likely to collaborate, whereas in some of the emerging industries or technologies, there was more scope for collaboration, and there the project could be bigger than the firm. So there seemed to be much more of a dynamic that might lead to clustering in some of the emerging industries. Just next slide, please, Antonio. Another set of things that we found from the consultations that, as I say, there was plenty of collaboration going on, but that there was I think, given a kind of general understanding where clusters were at, that we needed much more of that, and that much of the collaboration between businesses that was happening was vertical. It was customer-supplier collaboration, quite limited horizontal collaboration, even when many of the firms were involved either in broader networks or trade associations. Their extent to which they collaborated with their competitors was quite limited, and even more so on a cross-border basis. So within Northern Ireland, there may be some, much less so with partners, say, in the Republic of Ireland. And Intertrade Ireland's work has been trying to kind of address that to see whether there's any opportunity for, say, clusters or business networks that are on either side of the border to align with one another. I think there's some exciting work to come there too. Another interesting thing too, I suppose, in the extent of collaboration was companies did collaborate with further and higher education institutions, but not to an extent around sort of technology transfer or technology innovation adoption to the extent that you would expect. So an extent there of research hubs without spokes, I think is probably a good way of describing that for institutions like my own. Typical barriers are a lack of trust, and that could even come across in cross skills development, where people were afraid of losing staff. A lack of critical mass, I think, is a key one for a small economy like Northern Ireland, and that's something that's shared, I think, from what Eleanor has said, south of the border. So there again allows perhaps the scope for greater cross-border collaboration. And some of the things that we did find with successful networks or clusters within Northern Ireland, they tended to have a strategic sectoral vision and a buy-in from the participants. Those were the two things that seemed to start them off, and a catalyst being driven by a common cause. So that seemed to be the things that were networks had been successful in Northern Ireland. That common cause piece was critical. So just the next slide, please. The points that I had made earlier around the spectrum, I don't need to dwell on this, but in a sense what we found overall was that there was a long way to go to clustering, and indeed a willingness to collaborate might not be the only barrier. I think when we looked elsewhere, what we found was that it was around kind of organising yourselves around a greater time horizon, trying to move beyond the project into sort of embedding clustering and collaboration within firms more deeply. So we found that most firms were located, at the interview, were located somewhere on the spectrum, but probably more to the left-hand side, more to the one-off collaboration and the vertical collaboration, rather than that what we might call deep clustering. And just in the next slide, please, Antonio. When we looked elsewhere, I think there were three things we did find that were kind of critical, and this was looking across Europe in the main. Long-term thinking around sort of cluster development and cluster policy seemed to us to be, if that was to happen, if it was to be introduced in Northern Ireland, would be critical, really, that long-term thinking. The role of the CMOs and the cluster management organisations was crucial, and something I don't think was well understood by policymakers within the North. And in a sense, where it was understood, I think it was understood in a very inflexible and rigid manner. The process by which CMOs can develop beyond being sectoral specialists into broader specialists around innovation and cluster management still, I think, is a concept that needs to be grappled with. I think that argument could equally be applied, I suspect, to the Republic of Ireland as to Northern Ireland. So I think that's a crucial thing. If we are to actually get serious about clusters, I think that the role of the CMOs will be a crucial part in that. And I suppose an idea that clusters will evolve was another thing that I think we took from elsewhere, from practice elsewhere. And I think maybe towards the end of the presentation here, towards the final slides, and towards maybe the next one. So yeah, just what next really in Northern Ireland. This is my final slide. What we suggested to the department, and they've taken up on this, was to and was subsequently kind of derailed by the COVID crisis, was to issue a competitive call for a number of clusters. I think they're looking at 3 to emerge from that. That there should be greater level of support for CMOs along a longer time horizon than putting a cluster manager into a particular network, leaving them there without any training, and then say a 2 or 3 year time horizon, and that's the end of it. We felt that needed to be looked at in a much more holistic manner. And then some of the points there that Eleanor also made. One of the things I think that we took from elsewhere, and we would believe, is that there's a great opportunity for greater policy alignment in Northern Ireland, as much as south of the border. The idea of the traction of clusters within broader industrial policy has been quite poor over time, and we believe that setting it aside as here's a cluster policy alongside our innovation policy or our public procurement policy isn't the way to go. We think that in a sense, yes, we might find that there are clusters there. We may find that there are clusters there, but actually getting that policy alignment and pushing cluster policy into broader economic policy or industrial policy within the country will be key. And a final one around alignment will be, we need to think again about the natural geography of clusters. In many cases, the natural geography spreads beyond Northern Ireland, so the cross-border element within that, both north-south and east-west, I think is a critical factor of it. Lucia has asked there, just on the chat function, about the numbers of clusters. We estimate certainly within Northern Ireland there was probably 4 or 5, Lucia, that you would call clusters. There were many more business organisations and business networks, but what we would kind of understand as organisations with cluster managers in it, there were at that stage 4. There's possibly now 5. That would be the kind of census scale within Northern Ireland. I think Eleanor's numbers were in around the 14, 15 mark, so small enough numbers, but it's from a small base, and we're kind of getting there. So that's basically, I suppose, the points that I would like to make. As I say, they would echo some of what Eleanor has said. They're slightly different in other places, but I suppose the supports for CMO and the broader policy question of, do you have a cluster policy, or do you embed the concept of clustering within broader SME policy, enterprise policy, is the key question, I think, north and south of the border. And with that, Antonio, I'll pass back to you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I love your questions, both Eleanor's ones and Eoin. I really think that you are touching the key points of our realities. So thank you, congratulations. But before going for the comments and questions, we need to welcome now Clodagh from Cluster Center and our main link with your country. So welcome, Clodagh. Thank you for organizing this session, and congratulations for the work that you are doing. Should I give you the presentation rights, or how do you want to proceed? We are not hearing you, Clodagh. I don't know why. No, you are not muted. You are. You have your. No. You are not muted, but we cannot hear you. Could you perhaps disconnect and connect again your headphone? Could it be that? No, it's not working, Clodagh. Sorry. We will wait. Clodagh is reconnecting. Okay. While we wait for Clodac, I see that we have with us James Wilson. Welcome, James, and he's answering in the chat the question from Lucia. Would you comment while we wait for Clodac, James?
Sure. Thanks, Antonio. Hi, everybody. Yeah, no, I've just done a quick look at the ECCP, and there are 10 cluster organisations registered in Ireland and 0 in Northern Ireland. So, given what Eleanor and Ioan have been talking about in terms of this increasing policy focus in Ireland, it seems like a great time to try and encourage those clusters that are not there to register and benefit from all the opportunities. Also, as I think Benoit said earlier in the chat, to update profiles, because again, just had a quick look at the statistics, and currently of the 10 Irish cluster organisations, none of them have so far updated their profiles since the ECCP relaunched last in February. And the advantages of updating the profile is that they can get much better matchmaking, much better connections and networking opportunities, because of we can be more precise in making them visible, etc. So there's plenty of encouragement, I think, to the emerging organisations in Ireland to engage with the ECCP, I think.
And if I can just add to that, James, it would be also great to have the support of the Irish experts here present as well, to identify those organizations who, let's say, not qualify is a very harsh term, but who kind of respect the validation criteria, so that it is easy understandable that they fulfill, let's say, the mission of a cluster organization. That would be very, very helpful.
I can give you some examples. For example, now something like 6 weeks ago, we needed to contact those clusters working on bio in the bio sector, you know, for the task force on the vaccines increasing of production. And we looked in the database of the ECCP, and we didn't find any cluster in Ireland. So this is really important, because we don't know if they are not registered. For sure we can contact Clodac, and I think that way we found some of them. Okay, but it's very important for the opportunities on creating consortia for the new goals to have them registered in the ECCP properly. Okay. Clodac, are you there? Can you try to speak now? I don't think that Clodac is hearing me. Clodac? We are not hearing you. I see that she is connected by phone. Clodac? So we will open the floor now for questions while we wait for Clodac, okay? Or comments on your presentation, and I'm sure that I hope Clodac will join us later. Okay, so who has comments or questions? Hello, Clodac. I can see you. I can hear you, sorry.
I'm
really
here by telephone. I'm here by telephone. So you might have to turn me down. Is that okay? I'll deliver by telephone. We're never short of a solution here. Antonio, are you okay to share?
Yes, I can share your presentation, no problem at all. Okay, let me open it. Here it is. Okay, Clodac. We are not hearing you now. I don't know why, but you are muted. Let me check if I can unmute you. Now? Now. Can you speak now?
Yes. Yes, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yes, okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. Thank you to the European Clusters Alliance for this opportunity. It is a really exciting opportunity for the All-Ireland Cluster ecosystem My own background is in regional development, and for the next 10 to 12 minutes, I'm going to introduce you to the journey in developing this all-island network of clustering practice and to the clusters, so those people on the front line. To the next slide, Antonio. So in 2019, we set out to bring together the quadruple helix and position itself as the vector for bringing together the different strands of clustering practice into a common platform. So this is the timeline from where the Cluster Centre as an organisation has developed and the milestones that have been achieved. And you can see on this journey, COVID-19 had a really important and positive impact as it became a live demonstrator site for what is a cluster, and it accelerated understanding to the type of cluster responses from across the ecosystem. So you can see the timeline there and the existing individual and excellent clustering practice that was in place across the island. So the next slide, Antonio, please. I think it was really important as well to testify to clustering practice, the relationships that have been building over this time. So not only the previous milestones, but in 2019, I was reading papers by Eleanor and Owen and John Hobbs, and in 2021, we're sitting here as colleagues presenting on the all-island cluster landscape. These relationships are extensive and generous, and there's often a call to Antonio or Aoife in the Southern Hemisphere, James Wilson, in the last few weeks, as I'm trying to locate a particular expertise or experience and bring that into the Ireland cluster landscape. In particular, the recent focus, so in March, we had a month on clustering for policymakers, and along with the policy drivers from the European Expert Group and recommendations and smart specialisation, we can see shifts in the public-public alignment and the discussions that are underway. So at this time, I believe that as a result of animating this different activity and building these relationships, trust is growing, there is deeper collaboration. We're having the benefits of joint discussions and opportunities are emerging, and the appetite for collaborative action is becoming nearer. Thanks, Antonio. Thank you. So with our small resource base, we're shining a light on the cluster opportunity. We're delivering cluster capacity building training events, cluster-to-cluster collaboration, online meeting forums, networking. We're joining the dots. We're bringing clusters together to discuss collective ambition. Across the quadruple helix, we've had good traction from policymakers, regional, national, local. We have a piece of work to do around the social economy, and I'm focused on that at this time. And in our cluster capacity building, we're looking at events, communication and mentoring. And to speak to James's point on the number of clusters registered, I think when I started there was 2 clusters registered on the ECC youth platform, so we're making good progress in that regard. To the next slide, Antonio, please. So, and I know Lucy had asked, so we're still, figuring out what is a cluster initiative. So we have a cluster, GSI cluster, that is 10 years in place. We have other clusters that are under 10 years in place. We have 12 new cluster initiatives coming onto the market, and we have less than 50 cluster practitioners in Ireland. And this is the profile of attendees that we would have had. And we can see that it's, first of all, cluster to cluster, and now we're having cluster to public, and we're having public-public discussions as well. So in a short time frame, we're having really great discussions and bringing in that international best practice. We go to the next slide, Antonio. Yeah, I have got a video. Nina will decide how long we can show it for, but I thought it was important to hear from the clusters themselves and to give them the platform there on the front line, if you will. Nina, can you play that, please?
Giving Nina the presentation rights, just one moment, and she will try to share. We are not hearing the sound, sorry, Nina.
Greetings from Ireland.
Perfect.
I'm the Business Development Manager for Geoscience Ireland. GI is a business cluster which assists Irish companies in winning business overseas by way of innovation and collaboration. We are sponsored by Geological Survey Ireland and the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and work closely with our National Export Agency, Enterprise Ireland, and our Department of Foreign Affairs to access new markets. Our vision is for Ireland to be a centre of excellence for geoscience. Geoscience underpins natural resource development, energy, civil infrastructure developments, and GI exports this niche expertise to over 80 countries. We look forward to playing a critical role in the decarbonisation of our economy and societies and delivering on climate action policies. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
We are the Irish Wood and Furniture Manufacturing Network, set up expressly to develop the Irish wood manufacturing industry and lead it to a different level, both as a supplier to local markets and very much as an exporting industry. As our market is so small, we need the exports to give us scale. Our 4 pillars are education and training, commercial development, design and innovation, manufacturing excellence. Under the theme of commercial development, we're about to commence a 3-year development project with the assistance of Enterprise Ireland, who have been so supportive of our efforts. Arising out of that, we see the prospect of a number of clusters forming in the construction and furnishing fields, and we will support the development of such clusters with all the resources we can muster. We are not a cluster ourselves as such, but we see within our network, the prospects of a number of clusters forming.
I'm Paul Moore, and I'm Director of Future Screens NI. Future Screens NI is one of the UK's creative industries clusters. It was established 3 years ago, and it's funded through the Arts and Humanities Research Council with funding from the UK Strategy Challenge Fund. Really, our vision for Future Screens NI is to work with local businesses to develop research and development in the sector and to ensure that the creative industries become the new heavy industries. In a number of agencies, we've got a number of partners, BBC, RTE, Invest NI, the Harbour Commission, and we've developed a programme which at the moment is working around about 112 projects with over 200 partners. During COVID, we widened our scope slightly and we've found ourselves working much more with community and with a number of government agencies. And the exciting piece about that is that we've added another piece to our mission statement, which is in the last 2 years of Future Screens, we shall leave no one behind.
My name is Katrina Murphy. I am the Cluster Manager for Ireland South East Financial Services, a new cluster arising from the Regional Economic Development Plan directed by Ireland South East Development Office, supported and funded by the 5 local authorities of Wexford, Waterford, Carlow, Kilkenny and Tipperary. Ireland South East is ranked #1 region, European region of the future. Our cluster is enterprise-led by cluster champion Terry Clune of Clune Technology, a well-appointed champion with 35 offices across 22 countries. Today, our cluster totals 57 members represented here in our cluster map, underpinned by strong IoTs, innovation hubs and government support agencies. Our enterprise companies include the industry Goliaths, SMEs and startups, collectively employing over 8,200. Our current priorities for our cluster is ensuring education and training providers are aligned with industry needs, digitisation, sustainable finance, and honing that smart specialisation as well. What sets us apart in Ireland South East is we are the perfectly placed location for ambitious businesses, careers, and healthy work-life balance.
I don't know if you want to, there's still 4 minutes left of the video, if you want to continue.
Go for another.
Hello, my name is John Drysdale, and I'm the Business Development Manager for the Shannon International Aviation Services Centre, part of Shannon Group and based here in the west of Ireland. We are an aerospace and aviation business cluster consisting of over 80 companies and 3,000 employees. Our cluster specialises in aircraft leasing, maintenance and repair, technical records, airworthiness and precision manufacturing for the aerospace sector. Currently, our cluster is helping our customers manage the fleet of stored aircraft to return them to service in the near future. Meanwhile, here in the Shannon campus, we've been busy fitting out a mobility test centre to test and gather data for future autonomous mobility sector companies. We call this Future Mobility Campus Ireland. Thank you very much.
My name is Lisa Johnston, and I'd like to introduce you to the Strangford Lough Tourism Cluster in Northern Ireland. It was established in early 2019 and comprises of key tourist operators and stakeholders from the Strangford Lough area, supported by Invest NI, Tourism NI, Ards and North Down Borough Council, Newry Morning Down District Council, and has a list of SMART objectives over a 30-month period, which is focused on ensuring commercial return for all of the cluster members. This is our call to action, the Time and Tide Trail around Strangford Lough. Our location geographically is just outside Belfast and 90 minutes from Dublin, and our members are from a wide, diverse variety of tourism providers.
So Mega's vision is that mid-Ulster manufacturing companies have a successive pipeline of skilled talent fit for industry needs.
First of all, I think it can benefit the potential candidates that we can bring into our apprenticeship schemes and into our businesses. Secondly, it can benefit the employer through networking throughout the area, which is in fact a hotbed of manufacturing. And thirdly, the region. Mega is an excellent way of promoting the region and promoting what actually, the good work that goes on within the local area.
I think that the companies that are involved have said, never before have they all collaborated and networked as strongly with each other. And I suppose that was even come into play when COVID happened. Companies came together and used the platform of Mega to discuss things like reopening together as a sector, making sure that the buildings were safe for their employees.
We believe that Ireland has the vision and the ambition to reshape the way in which the world uses and engages with the sea. After all, when it comes to the blue economy, we have an edge.
Thanks, Nina. I think that's good. Thanks, Nina. And Antonio, I have just 2 or 3 slides. I won't be long, if that's okay. I'm conscious of time, and we're not going to get to questions.
Okay. Thank you, Clark. I'm coming back to your presentation. Should you continue?
Yeah, so next slide, Antonio. Yeah, so I wanted to acknowledge the support of the different state, regional, local organisations and agencies in supporting the cluster landscape to date. I think that's very important. Without their support, we wouldn't have this individual activity and the clusters of where we are. Next slide, Antonio, please. So the cluster centre, what we're doing, we're building the cluster cornerstones. So trust is growing. We are developing the common language. We're shining a light on where we need to go in support of Eleanor and Owens, and we're building the understanding for the journey ahead. So next slide, please, Antonio. To Lucia's question there, so we completed a map of the clusters and cluster initiatives and networks that are vibrant and claiming to be clusters across Ireland. That is where we are right now. And that is our international connections. We're very grateful for the European Cluster Alliance, ECCP and TCI network, and accessing and connecting and building relationships with yourselves. And the final slide, please, Antonio. Yeah, so for 2021, we have the inaugural cluster conference taking place in Ireland in September, October this year. That's what we're planning for. We're building capacity across the quadruple helix policy, cluster practitioners, bringing in the social economy, and we have Eleanor, Owen, Chris Van Eggers, John in the academics. We're looking to cluster map and benchmarks. Ideally, that's the next step that we need to go to. I've just completed the Cluster Centre along with Owen, Eleanor and John Hobbs, an application to Intertrade Ireland for synergy project around a cluster research all Ireland network. And we're looking to secure national resources to support and embed strategic cluster programs of work. I suppose we are breaking ground. We are building bridges. We are a cluster junior, and we hope to be a cluster teenager. We are broadening the network, and at this time bringing in a network of stakeholders. I think the business case for clusters is now within our sights, and we need to move into the space of a national or an all-island policy framework. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You are very, very welcome, Clodagh. So we have very few minutes to comment. I think that it will make sense to span a little the timing, okay, because if not, it will be impossible. I will open the floor, but I have just one question for you, very important, okay? So what can we do to help you to build a stronger cluster community? That is my question, but please don't answer that now. I will open the floor and we can return to that later if you want. Who wants to comment or just add to the dialogue? Benoit, welcome.
Thanks, Antonio. I will try to turn on my camera. I think it's there. Looks like I made the right choice of colors today to speak about Ireland. No, I just wanted to ask to the speakers, basically, you mentioned that there is an increasing policy focus on clusters in Ireland, which is very good, obviously, for us. I was simply wondering, I mean, in terms of drafting the National Recovery Plan for Ireland, but also maybe in the preparation of the what we call the operational programs, regional operational programs, to be funded with the Regional Development Fund. How do you feel that clusters have been invited to contribute to those plans, or how do you feel that clusters are being represented as potential beneficiaries from these two major investment plans?
Can I respond, Benoit? Eleanor here. I think the capacity for a cluster-based response is still quite limited. And I can sort of echo my comment in relation to the issue identified in the chat. You know, we will do our best to support the relatively new Irish cluster organisations to register on the ECCP. But if you think about the barriers that those cluster organisations might perceive are there as being, you know, new organisations to a structure that has, you know, developed and grown across Europe for many, many years now, I think on both sides to try and remove any obstacles that might be either perceived or real, it's important to appreciate that these Irish-based organisations are still quite new to the whole clustering scene. And my own presentation, my view still remains that clustering remains peripheral to a lot of our policy making, but yet the potential seems really there in a way that it hasn't been up until now, not least because both the Indigenous Policy Organisation as well as IDA Ireland, the multinational focused organisations, both of them now are really focused on the clustering potential. And I think that augurs well in terms of a more coherent relationship between the agencies that will help the policy to become more meaningful.
Thank you very much. Marek, you were commenting in the chat about the...
Yes, thank you. I remember when I was on smart specialization 2014-20 with Ireland, we had, I remember there was only one person responsible for this, and there was technological leads, let's say, in the island. The clusters were not very much involved in bottom-up process at that time. I wonder if it changed now to develop for the 2021-27, or how are you involved in this process of designing and then implementing the smart specialization strategy in Ireland? Are you at all, or it's really still to work on this? Thanks.
There's a huge gap into which we have to make our contribution felt. The smart specialization strategy up until now has been quite top down, and with the absence of a substantial number of cluster organizations, that there is somewhat of a vacuum. So I think there is a lot more that needs to be done in terms of a bottom-up process. And again, if that is one of those areas that can be identified as where, you know, ECA, ECCP support is available to the Irish organizations, I think there may be ways of helping those organizations to identify the benefits of making themselves known more widely across Europe. So I think it's a win-win.
Yeah, I think you can make a point to government as well, that this is the eligibility criteria for getting money from the European Regional Development Fund, to have a governance where you have the structure, and clusters are very much embedded in this because it's a bottom-up process. So I think that now is the time to really get there and be listened and heard. Of course, with the process of making strong the cluster organizations. Thanks.
Antonio, may I come in? It's Owen here.
Sure.
I would echo, just in answer to both Benoit's and Marek's questions, I would echo what Eleanor has said. I think the danger might be at the moment that there'd be too much weight placed on a fairly new architecture if there was a lot of kind of pressure placed on the cluster organizations to respond to this or that. I think maybe, you know, advice could come from the ECCP, which may help there. I also kind of feel on the smart specialization piece, it's an interesting example where that was very much top down last time in Northern Ireland. It was very much a government department speaking to government department or to industrial development organisation. I think there'll be no less excuse this time, I think, for reaching out within that process to the clusters and the emergent cluster organisations and business networks to involve them in that. I think if things go back to Europe that are very much on a top-down level, that question would need to be asked as to why clusters and, as I say, those kind of emergent organisations weren't involved this time around. You know, when it comes to funding being handed out at that stage. And I think there's a good opportunity there, but there's possibly also a carrot, I think, there for government to put a bit of support, you know, and I mean North and South, to put a bit of support into the cluster organisations to become more involved in these processes.
Yep, there is a suggestion from Benoit about the role that we can play, giving you references also what is working well in other regions. So we will follow that suggestion, Benoit. I think it's very important to share them. I will give you another example.
Can I make a question to Eliane and Antonio? A very quick question. Eliane, one of the successes for the Irish model, the Celtic Tiger, was the multinationals roles. As you know, there is a lot of key people in the US and other countries that were able to draw to Dublin and other cities, Google, Microsoft, and other examples of key American companies. How is the relation of these multinationals with the clusters in Ireland?
Yeah, you're asking a very important question, because to understand the success of the Irish economy, you know, the multinational story has been such an important contributor. And when you've got a policy that works so well, I think that's partly an explanation as to why the focus on clustering hasn't been as it should in the view of a cluster researcher. Of course, I would say that, but I think it's increasingly recognized that with, you know, digitalization and with scale becoming increasingly important for big multinational companies, and the productivity gap widening between those big companies and the long tail of SMEs, that we need to be more proactive in the SME space. And I think it's that linkage piece that I see now as really potentially there, when both the agencies that support the multinationals and the agency supporting the indigenous recognize the potential for bringing these large and small players together. So I think it's in that context that perhaps, you know, best practice or good examples from Europe might be most productive in terms of advancing the cluster story.
Yeah, we have good references on that, but I don't want to enter now on that point because we could keep for other session about it. We could keep the point pending for another session. It's a very interesting point also. And I see the comment from Benoit. Yes, we will continue working on some analysis of clusters across different countries in Europe. I think it's very important, and that we learn from every country experience. And yes, we will work on it. James, you have the last word.
I'm not. Sorry, my microphone went. Yeah, I was just making a point there that I'm aware of orchestras involved in an Interreg project as advisory partner with the Southern Regional Assembly of Ireland, and they are seeking in this project to give more of a multi-level dimension to the smart specialization strategy. Now, this could be an interesting opportunity, I think, for cluster organizations, because it's much easier to engage perhaps in a bottom-up way where there's more of a recognized multi-level dimension. So if anyone is interested, I can put you in touch with the person from the Southern Regional Assembly who's coordinating that from the Irish side. And yeah, I think that I've been involved, as Claudia said, with various discussions in Ireland and also through Ulster University over the last year or so. And it's fascinating to see this kind of emerging and quite fast emerging cluster landscape. And I think there's a very exciting potential ahead.
Wonderful. So thank you to all of you. There has been a lot of points that I would love to continue studying and speaking about. So we need to organize another session, at least with you, or I don't know, to include you in the rest of our sessions that you know, we are organizing every Tuesday and Thursday. So you are invited to join us in the future and to contribute to this open discussion at a pan-European level. So thank you again, especially to the speakers, Claudia, Eleanor, Eoin, and see you soon, I hope. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Bye.